Okay, welcome to the Wild New Frontier. This is the California Avocado Society, University of California Cooperative Extension, California Avocado Commission bi-monthly meeting on avocados. And Eric Folk just showed up all the way from UC Riverside. He'll be filling in for one of our speakers. Mary Lou Arpaia is speaking to us from Visalia. It's great. So we're actually, this is hybrid. So you're real people. So you can eat the cookies and the coffee and the water back there. And people at home are going to have to figure out how to do that themselves. And hopefully laid back. There's what Sosan Knoble here is the secretary for the society. And she said there were 90 people registered.
Actually 100.
100. So we're 100 people enrolled on the Zoom. And so maybe that's the future of these meetings. We'll have some of it in person and some of it on Zoom. Some of these folks are coming in from Spain and Italy and Israel and Chile and New Zealand and all over the world. India, Namibia, some of the folks are speaking. So we're thankful for our sponsors today, Calavo, Westpac, Index Fresh, Mission, Westphalia Fruit, Brokaw, world's largest avocado nursery, Del Rey, Nutrient Farm Credit. Patricia Manosalva is a plant pathologist who's doing this rootstock breeding program at UC Riverside. And she has a, how do we do this? She's got a survey that she's trying to do of what we want bred into the rootstocks of the future. Yes, they will be root rot resistant. Yes, they will be salinity resistant, but what else do we want as growers in these rootstocks? So she's got a survey there's a paper version back there. There's this one online. She'd like you to fill that out. So with that, we have three groups of speakers, or we have three topics. We have rootstock specifically, and Consuelo Fernandez from Brokaw is going to be speaking on that. Mary Lou Arpaia from UC Riverside is going to be speaking on varieties and the variety program. And then we'll have a grower panel sitting up here sharing their experiences with rootstocks and varieties. So with that, Consuelo, would you like to come speak to us?
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to talk today. And I've been asked to talk about the clonal avocado rootstocks that are available in California. And in order to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the past, the present, and the future of the rootstock availability. So when making this presentation, I realized that the avocado rootstock industry in California has been like a lottery that it's won every 15 years, because it seems every 15 years, traditionally, there's been a successful release. So we started with the Duke 7 rootstock that was selected in the 1950s when Phytophthora cinnamomum started devastating the California avocado industry. And this rootstock is still commercially available. This rootstock was only released commercially in 1970s when there was a protocol for commercial propagation of clonal avocado rootstocks. A few years later, they released the Martin Grande selection and the Thomas selection, but they came out for a brief moment in time, and then they both had some weaknesses. So Martin Grande didn't produce any fruit, and the Thomas was too sensitive to salinity, and it was not productive in certain areas. So about 16 years later, Toro Canyon is still one of the commercial viable rootstocks and one of the most successful ones. And the Border rootstock was released because it had good behavior under high chloride conditions, under high Lyme-induced chlorosis conditions. And it's still been in the market, in the industry for a while, but it's been like a niche rootstock. It's only for certain areas because it's susceptible to Phytophthora cinnamoni, so it's not widely sold. So as I was mentioning, in the year 2000, we had two main rootstocks in the industry, Duke 7 and Toro Canyon. And the line over here is showing the total avocado rootstock sold by Brokaw Nursery. So in the year 2000, we have two rootstocks. One of them is 30 years old. The other one is 15 years old. In 2001, we have the filing of the Dusa rootstock that became quite popular a few years after it was released. It's a selection from South Africa, and it has been the leading rootstock in the industry, closely followed by Toro Canyon. The sales of the Duke 7 rootstock started decreasing a little bit because it wasn't as Phytophthora resistant as these other two rootstocks, but it still had a niche market that was mainly for the colder areas where salinity was not an issue either. So again, 15 years later, more or less, 13 years later, we have more releases. 14, there's the release of the Stedham, St. Mayor, and Uzi rootstocks by the University of California. In 2018, we have the release of Tammy, Miriam, and Ben Yaakov, selections from Israel, as well as the release of the KB1, Topara. It's also known as Topara, and it's a selection made in Peru. And then in 2020, we have the release of Leola and Serala rootstocks from South Africa, from the Westphalia breeding program. So my intention here was to mainly show you how, like 8 years ago, the whole industry or market or offer of rootstocks in California has changed enormously. So we went from one release every 15 years to several releases in the last 8 years. Okay. So with this graphic over here, I wanted to show you more or less how the distribution of rootstock availability has been changing in the last years. So we start with 2012, where we had mainly 4 rootstocks available for the industry that were Borcher, Duke 7, Dusa, Toro Canyon. Despite here in the middle is showing the sales from the estimated sales for 2022. So you can see how these new colors have been coming into play. These new rootstocks have been coming into play. And I put an interrogation mark for 2032 because we really don't know what's going to happen, what path the avocado industry is going to take. Whether it's going to take a path similar to some other fruit crops, for example, apples or pears, where they have several different rootstocks that are adequate for like niche specific areas, or whether we're gonna tend to go back to where we were before and have 4, maybe 5 selections that will address most of the problems. So they will be like the dominating ones in the industry. So what's gonna happen in the future, we still don't know. And I think it will be determined on what happens in the next 5 to 6 years. In this slide, I'm showing the first row over there are the 4 commercial rootstocks that were available 10 years ago. And then below that, I introduced all the ones that are commercially available now as well. So it's 10 more rootstocks. So we went from having 4 main rootstocks to having now 14 rootstocks that are available in the industry. I colored the different rootstocks in different colors depending on what origin they have. So the blue ones, Dusa, Leola, and Serala, come from the Westphalia fruit breeding program in South Africa. The Ben Yaakov, Miriam, Tammy, and BC207 are selections made mainly from West Indian rootstocks, and some of them from Israel, from the Volcani Institute. And then the orange ones are the ones made by the University of California in Riverside. The yellow ones are made by individuals, growers, for example. So Turkanian, Borchard, and Topara are not bred by, are just selections that from scape trees in growers' orchards. So now I'm gonna try to go through the characteristics of all these new rootstocks. It is a bit boring to look at them in a screen because it's a lot of information, but hopefully we'll be able to have a meeting outside in an orchard where you can actually look at the trees. And also a lot of this information has been gathered by the breeders or by other institutions. The University of California published a lot of information on these rootstocks, as well as the Volcanic Institute from Israel. So the three releases from the University of California, Stedham, Uzi, and St. Mayer. Stedham has been the most popular one in the industry lately, or from the three of them. And it's mainly because it behaves pretty good under high salinity conditions. So it was selected by its high tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomum. It's considered to be moderately tolerant to salts. It's reported to produce smaller compact trees, and that's what this graph over here is showing. So what we do when we plant some trials, it's instead of measuring the tree height and the tree dimensions, because we prune them out starting on the third or fourth year, we usually like measuring the trunk diameter, and that gives us an estimate of how vigorous the tree is. So in this trial, it's a gem trial where Stedham showed to be one of the most compact, smaller trees. It generally supports healthy trees, and it has very good performance as replanting existing orchards. And that's a comment that our field representative, Dan Grant, has been made, because he has been, or we have been selling a few of these trees, especially down south, where they put Stedham when they had like dead trees in between an established orchard, and Stedham seems to be behaving quite well under those conditions. Then we move on to Uzi, that has a very strong tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomum. It can suffer with high salinity in the soil or in the water. It's reported to be a very vigorous rootstock, and it's generally competitive in terms of yield when compared to leading commercial varieties. Then moving on to St. Mayer. St. Mayer it's also highly tolerant to Phytophthora cinnamomum. It's very sensitive to salinity. It's reported to be the best yielding under root rot situations between Stedham and Uzi. And it's recommended for replant situation where high root rot pressure is there. In this graph over here, I just want to bring up the fact that we have these two trials that are in Goleta. The Goleta Ranch 1 is shown, it's in a ranch where the soil has high clay content and it has bad quality of water. The Goleta Ranch 2 has perfect water, and the content of clay in the soil is not as high as in the first ranch. So here you can see how it differs the behavior of these two rootstocks. So St. Mayer and Uzi are both behaving quite well, are actually some of the best performing ones in the ranch 2 where we have good water conditions, while they are one of the worst ones in the other side that's very close, same area, same slide or same kind of slide or hillside conditions, and it's performing very bad or much worse in the other areas where we have high salinity. So this is something that's important to highlight, because we used to say St. Mayer, it's not good for California, but there might be some places where salinity is not an issue, that it might have a chance or an opportunity. And here I have this other graph that's showing a gem trial that we have with different rootstocks, and where also St. Mayer, it's one of the outstanding rootstocks. So again, if you don't have salinity issues, it might be that St. Mayor, it's a good option for you. Moving on to the 2018 Volcani rootstock releases, I just want to say that these 3 selections came from Professor Ben Yaakov's selection program in Israel. Have a bit of West Indian blood in them. And he was looking for the most tolerant selections that also showed the least Lyme-induced chlorosis, and that they also had a degree of root rot tolerance. Generally, we tried, or now lately in the world, they are talking a lot about the Israeli or West Indian rootstocks. In general, in Chile, they are a lot of talk about West Indian selections, and that's because they tend to have more salinity tolerance when compared to a Mexican rootstock. They also tend to be highly resistant to Lyme-induced iron chlorosis when grown in calcareous soils. But one of the weaknesses of the West Indian as a race is that they tend to be more sensitive to cold. So a few years ago, I was in Chile in one of the orchards where they had West Indian rootstocks. They weren't these selections, they were different selections, but the trees in winter, they do tend to turn yellow and to suffer a bit. So that's something that we still need to look into for these selections. We haven't seen any indication that they will suffer with the cold over here, but we need to continue studying them. I have a reference on the cold temperatures where the West Indian selections that I saw in Chile started suffering due to cold. And I would say the area where I was inland in Chile, so the winter temperatures went, I think, in Celsius, but below 40 definitely at night, and during daytime maybe 70s, but it was cold throughout the whole winter season. And those were ceiling selections, so they are not the ones that we have been evaluating here. So the 3 rootstocks that have been released are the Miriam BC 218, to have a high tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomum. It performs well under drought condition and has demonstrated high tolerance to salinity. It's said to have medium to average vigor when grafted to CAS, and it's reportedly tolerant to alkaline soils. Then we have the TAMI or BC 801 that offers moderate tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomum. It has demonstrated high tolerance to salt. And in this graph over here, it's showing how the BC content into the leaf. So that's one of the ways the avocado rootstocks demonstrate to be good for salinity. It's when they don't translocate all the chloride up to the leaves. And then it has medium tree vigor, and it has a moderate tolerance to Lyme-induced chlorosis. The Ben Yaakov or BC66, it has also high tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomum. It has tolerance to salinity. The vigor is unknown yet, and it's reported to have a lower tendency towards alternate bearing. In this graph over here, this is a trial that we have at Walker Ranch behind Brokaw Nursery, where we have some of the different BC selections from the Ben Yaakov breeding program. And here you can see this is only 1 year of data, so it's performing quite well on that specific site for the first year. Of course, we need to continue evaluating the rootstocks and see how they behave. Then moving on to the Westphalia fruit selections from South Africa, we have the Leola and Serrala rootstocks. Leola was selected because of its tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomum. It may be susceptible to salinity, and that was something that was observed in one of Peggy Mock's salinity trials. I haven't seen it suffer a lot with salinity, but maybe because where we have our trials, we don't have high salinity incidence. It offers competitive yields and good tree health overall. It has performed well in both coastal and inland locations. And it also has good performance when grafted to gem. So it could be a candidate for gem as well. This table over here, it's some data that we gathered from our Yewa block up in Long Canyon Ranch, also behind the nursery here in Ventura. And we consider this a semi-commercial block because it's not randomized. And what we did is we planted one row of Dusa, one row of Toro Canyon, one Leola, Serrala, and one Arrow 18. And then we repeated that same pattern like 3 or 4 times in the block. And after harvesting this year, these are 3.5 or 3 years old trees when we harvested these, and all of them performed amazingly. But Leola was the champion on that one. This is only 1 year of data again. So of course we need to follow up on this for at least 5 years of data. But this is not the only block in Long Canyon where Leola was the champion. There were some other blocks where it also outperformed the other rootstocks. So I'm showing this map again, the one from the Little Denmark trial. This is the gem trial where we have the different rootstocks. And what I'm trying to show here is how Leola, it's not the best one, but it's following St. Mayor right behind this. So that's why I'm saying that it might have some potential as a good rootstock for gem. And we've heard similar comments from South Africa. Moving on to Serrala, it's been found to also offer an advantage in saline conditions. So going to the graphic that's here in this slide, it's showing the survival percentage per rootstock in one of the University of California. Some trees with very high salt contents, and Serrala was one of the highest survival rates of the rootstocks that were exposed to salinity. It's a vigorous tree. It should, and one of the possible weaknesses is that we have observed that sometimes when it's in the bottom of the hillsides, when there's no berms, it might suffer a bit with overwatering. So we need to keep in mind that if we're choosing Serrala, we need to go on hillsides or well-drained soils, or otherwise we can use berms. Then I'm moving on to the Topara or KB1 rootstock. That's a selection made in Peru. The main weakness of this rootstock is that it's not tolerant to Phytophthora cinnamomi. Its tolerance to salinity has not yet been demonstrated. In Peru, it seems to behave good under salinity conditions, but we still haven't observed that over here. It's a vigorous rootstock and it's capable of producing competitive yields. So in this chart over here, you can see the yield data on our FOD ranch in Santa Paula, where the KB1 rootstock or Topara shows to not have a very pronounced alternation from year to year. And it's the second best yielding after the Leola. It's better than Toro Canyon. But again, I said that one of the main weaknesses is that it's not tolerant to Phytophthora cinnamomi, but nowadays we have tools to manage Phytophthora cinnamomi, so we don't necessarily need to discard our rootstock because it's not good for Phytophthora. We now have arundis, we have berms, we have better irrigation practices, so there are ways to for our rootstock to still be successful in the industry, even if it's not tolerant to Phytophthora. Then to finish, we have the day selection. This is a selection that was made in Florida, actually. That's why it's not grouped with the other VCs that I mentioned before. And it's also said to have high tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomi. It's considered to be salinity tolerant. It's capable of producing competitive yields, and it's said to have moderate tolerance to Lyme-induced chlorosis. So we've been getting a lot of requests for this rootstock lately because it was the first of the VCs or rootstock that was available for the industry. And we don't have enough data to show that it's a bad rootstock. It seems to be performing okay, and we've been selling a few numbers, especially down south. Regarding the future availability of rootstocks, as you or some of you know, UCR will be releasing 5 new rootstocks in the next 2 to 5 years, and that's Patricia Manosalva's project. Then we do have 10 plus advanced selections that came from South Africa that are being tested in Ventura County. We are testing 17 new Israeli advanced selections in Ventura County. And by advanced, I mean that these rootstocks are already in the soil and in trials. So I'm showing this graph again where we have this trial with all these different VC selections. The only ones that are commercially available are the ones that I colored in orange in this graph. And as you can see, there might be some other interesting ones. For example, the VC804 or the VC256 that might be good candidates for California. But again, this is only 1 year data, so we shouldn't be taking big conclusions from this. But I know that the university has been testing also VC804, and it seems to behave good under several conditions. So we are now talking about placing it in different areas and hopefully making it commercially available in the near future. And Brokaw Nursery has also 10 new rootstock selections from Israel from a different program this time that are in quarantine. Whenever we bring material from other countries, we need to have a 2-year quarantine. And we also have 1 selection that came from New Zealand that's also undergoing quarantine at Brokaw Nursery. So to conclude the presentation, some final notes that I wanted to leave or take-home notes are that you need to know your conditions whenever you're planting or choosing a rootstock. We have had several growers who just decided to plant avocados without testing their soil, their water, or without even knowing the temperatures in the orchard. So one of the first things we would encourage is to know your conditions, test for salinity in the water and in the soil. Then we also recommend to test the rootstocks. There are several new rootstocks, and some of them might behave or might have similar advantages for your specific area. So we wouldn't encourage someone to go and plant 1,000 acres or with one rootstock that hasn't been tested under your conditions. So we would encourage, if you're ordering some trees, add 50, 100 some of these new selections that you think on your conditions and see how they behave. Also go out and visit. You are welcome to come to our trials to Brokaw Nursery whenever you want. I'm sure that Patty Manosalva would be willing to show you the trials that they are evaluating around California. Also, the California Avocado Commission has some trials with Patty that you can visit. So go out and see what's happening out there. Look for similar conditions to yours before making any commitment or any decisions. And also to stay connected, come to these meetings. A lot of the information that I showed had 1 or 2 or 3 years of data, but we cannot make very informed decisions based on limited data. So we need to come to these kind of meetings or to we have to attend university presentations and be really aware of what's happening, what's coming, how this data is updated year after year so we can make better decisions. So that's all for now.
So if you have questions,
do the rootstocks have a particular affinity to
breeds of trees. You know,
varieties of trees? Is there greater compatibility between some rootstocks for
Yes.
gem or Hass or?
From what we have seen now, all the commercial cultivars don't have to have any compatibility issues to either gem or Hass. So they all behave quite well with both cultivars.
Okay, any other questions here? How root rot tolerant is Toro Canyon? In my experience, it is limited, but I'm stuck with some. How root rot tolerant is Toro Canyon relative to other variety?
I think
selections?
To Dusa, it's quite similar in its tolerance. That's what I understand, but I don't have a range of tolerance. Like, I think that would be more like a university kind of person who can rate them. I can group them more or less, and I would say it's very similar to Dusa.
Ben, can I ask a question while you're going through them?
Yes, Mary Lou, welcome.
Anyway, Consuelo, thank you. Even though I couldn't see your slides, I'm sure they were beautiful. Two things is that John Mengi tested VC207 a lot when he had a lot of field trials, and the results from his work on VC207 is included in a lot in his old progress reports to the commission. So you can find that probably on Avocado Source. But the other question, when you triggered my memory that the very first rootstock trial that Gary Bender and I and Guy Whitney had down in Irvine, we had Borchard, and Borchard has no root rot, but it's an unbelievable rootstock. I mean, it was the #1 in the trial, and it changed the architecture of the avocado, Hass avocado tree. Could we resurrect that one and start putting that in trials? Because as you said, we have solutions for, or potential solutions for root rot now. What do you think?
I agree, Mary Lou. So I think the industry is changing. So also the limiting factors we used to have back in the day are not the same ones we have right now. Now we're focusing a lot on, I think, Lyme-induced sclerosis and salinity are one of the main limiting factors now, because Phytophthora can be controlled or managed with good irrigation practices around this, and we have tools for that. So I agree with you, Borchard should be included in the future trials. I was talking to Rob before coming here, and he was like, oh no, Borchard is amazing. It's a great rootstock. It could be really, really good when we don't have Phytophthora as a limiting factor. So
yeah, I mean, it was wonderful. It made the Hass tree upright and narrow like a Zutano, to a point that after 2 or 3 years, when you walk down the row, and we had all these 10 rootstocks all mixed up, you could pick out the Borchard trees without any problem. You could say, this is Borchard, and sure enough, look on the map, and it would be a Borchard tree. I mean, and it was the #1 producer. It made a big tree, but it was a very tall cylindrical tree, so it would also be conducive to high-density planting, potentially. I would just remember how impressive that the Hass was on that rootstock. It was very impressive.
Yeah, and it might be interesting also to look at it with gem as a scion. So
yeah,
I agree.
When rootstocks are being brought Brokaw and they're put in quarantine, what are you quarantining for, and why does it take 2 years?
Why are trees put into quarantine, and how long are they in quarantine for?
So I think it depends on where you're bringing them from. So, for example, when we bring materials from certain countries, we have different rules. It could be you have to test the rootstocks or the material over there for sun blotch viroid or for quarantinary pests that don't exist in California. So, for example, if you bring them, let's say from Chile, they do have a red mite or a different kind of thrips that's not present here. So it will depend country by country which kind of pest they are trying to protect us from. And you do have to go through the 2-year quarantine just to make sure that the virus or a new virus is not going to come out. So because viruses or viruses usually move, this is my understanding. I'm not a scientist, but my understanding is that viroids and viruses move very slow in a tree. So that's why you need the 2 years, just to make sure that it's not present over there. Like it's not gonna present later. So it's mainly for quaternary pests and possible diseases. And so everything that's coming in, either rootstocks, cultivar, they do have to go through a 2-year quarantine. This is a closed structure that only limited number of people can go in. It has a double door. So there's a whole bunch of rules that one needs to follow. No material can come out before the 2-year. Everything needs to be disposed in a certain way, burned. So it's difficult, but we do it.
Thanks.
I've got a question. Are you selling any seedling rootstocks now?
Only to garden centers. So I don't know of any grower. I'm not in the sales office, but I don't know of any grower who's actually buying seedlings. I know that we sell to smaller nurseries in Florida, Texas, green thumb kind of stores.
Okay, thank you. So our next speaker is Mary Lou Arpaia. She's a scientist at UC Riverside who's been very involved with avocados now for eons.
Anyway, I changed the title of the talk a little bit because Ben asked me to talk about varieties past, present, and future. And so I went to a plant breeding meeting in Iowa last week. And it was all about corn breeding. So there wasn't too much useful for a tree breeder there. But they had a guy come up and he talked about the 3 lessons he learned as a plant breeder. So number 1 is you get what you select for. So if you select, but you have to be thoughtful about how you select. The next thing he said, which I really, really like, is that the breeder needs to imagine the unseen. And so Eric Folk, who works with me, and myself, we're trying to imagine what the avocado tree should look like in 20, 30, 40 years from now. And it's not what we have today. It's not what I'm going to talk about today. It's going to be something completely different. But the breeder is responsible for imagining the unseen and trying to find the unseen and make it reality. And the third thing he said, is a quote from by Hoffer. And it basically goes that in times of change and adversity, the learned, the people who already know things, are basically going to get left in the dust. And it's going to be the learners, the people that are willing to adapt and change, that will continue inheriting the earth. And I think that's really important also from a plant breeding perspective and the selection of new varieties and for rootstocks, is that we always need to be learning. We always need to be observant, and we can't be stuck in the past. We have to always be looking forward, imagining the unseen. So with that, I'll try not to drone on too much and be too late on this. But as we all know, there's a number of avocado varieties that people grow in California. But Hass is definitely the dominant variety in California, although Gem is gaining importance. And Lamb Hass is still back in the background. And some people tell me that they're planning, and Reed has developed its own little niche. So there is room in the marketplace for things other than Hass. But by and large, we're a Hass industry. And so what does that mean for the California grower? Because the California grower, you are, in my mind, a threatened species, because you have urbanization breathing down your neck wherever we grow avocados. Even here in the San Joaquin Valley, we have a lot of urban growth occurring. We have challenges with water quantity and water quality. And we always have the threat of introduced pest or disease that's going to wreak havoc with our production systems. So we need to be thinking more, in my opinion, that we need more than a single variety, that we need to be a diversified industry. And the context of that also comes from the fact that the growth in domestic consumption really is a wonderful thing, and it was built upon the shoulders of Hass by the hard work of the California Avocado Commission back in the 1980s, when the industry embraced, due to some foresight, imagining the unseen of some industry leaders, of what a Ripe for Tonight program could do. And look, and we are reaping the benefits of that Ripe for Tonight program now, 50 years later. And the USA consumption still has tremendous opportunity for growth. The other thing is that our fruit that we produce in California is predominantly grown within the United States, it's sold within the United States. So we're not faced with these challenges like some of our colleagues in South Africa or Chile or Peru or Colombia. They have to harvest their fruit and put it on a boat and ship it somewhere. We don't have that problem. We have our market in our doorstep, and we need to take advantage of that. And even though our production has basically stayed the same, because consumption in the United States has grown so much, we have a very small shrinking market share. So what do we do to maintain our market share and also grow our market share in the future? So in this slide, the blue line is what was in California when California basically had the U.S. market to the south. Our only competition was Florida. And we have always been about 90% of the U.S. market. So you can see in that blue line, if you go from November to October, although we had a peak in the spring and the summer months, we actually had fruit in the marketplace for a longer period of time than we do now, which is the red line. Once we have now competition that the U.S. the U.S. grower has been compressed into certain months of the year, and you can see that most of our volume of fruit is being sold in April, May, June, and July. And we have very little fruit in the market from August through about February. So what do we do that we can put fruit into those time zones so that we enhance and grow the presence of the California market, the California grower in the market? So a consideration that we can have is that if you go to the USDA favor database that belongs to USDA APHIS, you will find that 35 different countries are allowed to ship avocados into the United States, the continental US. Most of these countries are in the Caribbean, and most of them are shipping West Indian varieties into the US. So the point we can learn from this is that there is a market in the United States for things other than Hass. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing is that the major importing sources of Hass avocados into the United States currently are Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and to a lesser extent, Chile. And of those, 3 of them, Mexico, Peru, and Colombia, by the way that the avocado was allowed into the United States for those countries, they are only allowed to ship Hass into the United States. And it's likely that any other country that's waiting to come into the United States will also be limited to only Hass. So Chile and New Zealand, for instance, are 2 countries that can ship whatever they want into the Hass, but they're small players. But these big players are limited only to shipping Hass into the United States. So the question you can ask from this is, does this give us, the California industry, an opportunity to differentiate ourselves and regain a stronger 12-month presence in the U.S. market? So what can we do? We can re-diversify our portfolio, and we already have the genetics in California. We already have the genetics here in California. But, you know, this will take in a buy-in from the people packing your fruit. and our marketing associations to say, yes, we're willing to market things other than Hass. And the other thing is, of course, these alternative varieties have to have good production, because at least initially, they probably will not get the same return to you as a grower as a Hass variety. So diversification of California's varietal portfolio provides an opportunity to provide the U.S. consumer with choice that only we from California can provide. Think about that one. We can, it allows us the opportunity to perhaps grow avocados in California in places we haven't grown them historically for a long time. And one of the places that I think of is rediscover the San Joaquin Valley. Because by putting trees and production in the San Joaquin Valley and supporting growers in the San Joaquin Valley, we are going to be putting fruit in that matures sooner than Southern California, so we can extend the market life or the window for different varieties. And it provides us an opportunity for increased productivity by per acre by bringing in alternative varieties. So this is sort of like what I see for the future, what I'm hoping for the future, that we need to take advantage of the fact that we're growing in the United States potential varieties, both that are currently available and hopefully in the future, that only we from California can grow and give the U.S. consumer. So, and I also want to remind you that the rise of the Hass variety took a long time. It was patented in 1935 and did not become the leading variety in California to the mid-1970s. So it took a very, very long time before it became the dominant variety in the United States. And the key thing that's really a high selling point for Hass is its fruit quality. It has very, very high fruit quality when it's harvested at proper maturity. It has good storage life with or without controlled atmosphere. And it is now, over time, become the leading worldwide variety. It markets very well. It ripens very well, especially when it's exposed to ethylene. And that propensity to go from a green-skinned fruit to a black-skinned fruit when it's ripe actually laid the foundation for where we are today in the U.S. As a leading avocado consumer in the world. So there are all other current new varieties that are all Hass-like, that are Hass-like. So I'm not going to say too much about Carmen, but there's also a new variety from Mexico, Florida Maria. We don't, to my knowledge, it's not here in the United States, but it is supposed to be more productive than, very Hass-like, but productive like Hass. We have two early Hass mutation selections, Eugenin and Flave from Chile. I'll say a few words about that. We have Maluma from South Africa, and I have some slides that Xander Ernst from South Africa provided me that I'll show. And then we have two University of California releases, the Gem and the Lamb Hass, which have acreage here in California. So the Carmen Hass originated in Mexico. Master licensee is Brokaw Nursery. It is unique in the sense that it has a very strong off bloom. It doesn't have that much advantage in off bloom here in California. And it has a different way of branching. And so it has a very distinct tree architecture. And if you want a little bit more information about that, I'd be happy to share what we have learned from the University of California with you if you ask. I want to spend just a few seconds with Lamb Hass and Gem. A big thing about Lamb Hass, it has a very different tree architecture, growth habit between Hass and Lamb Hass. That also the lamb has is a late season fruit. And so it is not harvested until the end of the summer. So differences between Hass and Lamb Hass is a mid to late summer fruit. The fruit shape and size, the fruit is larger. It tends to be more square in shape. And I think Those of you who have lamb has will know that it's more square in shape. It has this very nice upright growth habit so that it is adaptable to high density planting. It has flexible wood. So when I talk about Maluma and the work that they're doing in South Africa on trellising and Maluma, the lamb has probably could very well go on to a trellis as well. The lamb has, we know, is more tolerant to Persea mite. It also seems to be more heat tolerant than Hass. And data that we collected a long time ago at UC Riverside showed that it actually had a higher rate of photosynthesis than Hass and a higher chlorophyll content. If you put a Hass tree next to a lamb Hass, typically what you'll see is that the lamb Hass tree is much darker green than the Hass tree. Now, a downside of lamb Hass is when the trees are young, it can overflower. When the trees are young, they tend to drop their fruit, much like the maternal mother Gwen. And so those are downsides of lamb Hass from Hass. Many of you I know in the audience are already familiar with Gem. The Gem is another University of California release. It's a more compact tree, so it's not an upright tree like lamb. It's a small vase-like, very compact tree, very similar to Gwen, and it bears its fruit on the inside. And the differences between Hass and Gem is that the Gem maturity season overlaps with Hass, so potentially it could be a substitute to Hass over time. The fruit can accumulate very high levels of dry matter. The fruit shape is more teardrop, and it also has flexible wood, but the wood is not as flexible as a lamb has. Pest tolerance, I don't think that is as tolerant to Persea mite as lamb has. It does have less alternate bearing, and it seems adaptable to more extreme conditions, and we seem to be having fairly good fruit production here in the San Joaquin Valley, with good fruit size. So I just want to give you some data. This is data from Irvine that we collected in 1999 to 2005, where we had a trial of Gem, lamb Hass, and Hass. And you can see that on the left of the slide is Hass, the middle is lamb Hass, and on the right is Gem. So you can see that Gem and lamb Hass outproduce the Hass, but you can see that the Gem had less alternate bearing because you can see the colors don't fluctuate as much than the lamb Hass compared to the Hass. And in fact, if I calculate the alternate bearing index from this data set, you can see that the Gem, the lower the number, the better. So the Gem has a lower alternate bearing index compared to the lamb Hass, which was roughly equivalent to Hass. So you don't gain anything in alternate bearing with lamb Hass, at least from the data that we have collected at UC. The lamb Hass has a larger fruit, and the Gem also tends to have a slightly larger fruit than Hass. So we have a trial at Jim Lloyd Butler trial in Ventura County. We've had this for many years. And this is the canopy volume. So this is the actual volume of space that trees occupy. And so you can see that the large tree in this trial is the Hass, no matter what rootstock it's on. And the two smallest trees in this trial are lamb Hass and reed, with Gem being, I'm sorry. The reed and the Gem tend to be the smallest trees, with lamb Hass being intermediate and the Carmen being larger than the lamb Hass. And you can see that that trend shows up across the years. And if we look at the yield then, we can see that the lamb Hass actually has very high yield, and the Gem in terms of total yield is not as high as lamb Hass or Hass. But if we calculate the yield efficiency, or the yield per cubic meter of canopy, because the canopy volume of Gem and reed are smaller, you can see then that the Hass drops off as not being a high producer in terms of yield efficiency because it's a bigger tree. And the gem has a very high yield efficiency, followed by lambhass and reed. So there's different ways of looking at data, and this tells us again that it's likely that we can plant gem and lambhass and also reed in higher density than we can with hass, and then we can boost overall productivity per acre by planting in higher density. I wanted to mention briefly 2 hass bud mutations that have come from Chile. These are Flavia and Eugenin. They're patented varieties here in the United States. The tree and the fruit are very hass-like. The distinguishing characteristics, and I'll put this in quotes, is early maturation. We're trying to figure out how to define that early maturation. We've been working very hard on that. In fact, that is the basis of Eric Folk's PhD thesis. And large fruit size. And this variety is available from Avocado Nursery. They're the master licensee for these 2 varieties, and they're available in limited supply. And we've collected data both at the Lynn Cove Research and Extension Center in the San Joaquin Valley and down in Irvine at the South Coast Research and Extension Center. So up in Irvine, down in Irvine, I should say, the Flavia matures more quickly than hass, just like it says in the patent from where it was discovered in Chile. And it looks like it can be harvested starting in November. Up in the San Joaquin Valley, hass and Flavia are mature about the same time, including as well as Eugenin. And they appear that they basically have about the same harvesting time, so that you don't gain anything in maturation with Flavia and Eugenin compared to hass. And I went out looking at the trees actually 2 days ago with a visitor from Australia. And what you see there is that the fruit size is pretty impressive in the San Joaquin Valley, where you have a problem with overall fruit size. Fruit size tends to be smaller in the San Joaquin Valley. The Flavia and the Eugenin produce a big hass-like fruit in the San Joaquin Valley. Even in Irvine, the fruit size tends to be larger. And that's what this slide shows. This is data from Irvine. You can see that overall, they tend to have a lower overall yield compared to hass, although this is not significant when you do the statistics. But you can see definitely that the fruit size, average fruit size, is larger for both Flavia and Eugenin. So we're working very hard on trying to figure out what, if indeed they are earlier from a seasonality perspective. And part of the work that we're doing this year at the Kearney Agricultural Center is that Claudia Asensio is working with Eric and with David Oberlin at USDA. And we've been doing a lot of taste panels with Flavia and Eugenin, comparing it to hass, trying to figure out if we can define what makes them earlier. It does look like potentially that even though the fatty acid composition is similar, the dry matter composition is similar to hass, it does appear that there's a textural difference early in the season where the Flavia and the Eugenin are more smooth and creamy compared to hass. And maybe that is what it is all about. But we're probably going to have to do another year's worth of work to try to really hone in on that one. But they definitely have a larger fruit size. So these slides on Maluma were provided to me by Xander Ernst from Alice Beste Nursery. You may know that the Maluma comes from South Africa. It's been championed by Alice Beste Nursery in South Africa, and the variety is available to a limited extent here in California through Brokaw Nursery. And then Mark Buell from Avocado Nursery has also told me that they now will be selling Maluma also in California. So this is, again, the tree shape. If you are familiar with lambhass, in my opinion, the Maluma is very similar to lambhass in tree structure. It has that nice flexible wood, low growth figure, similar to the lamb Hass. It's an A flower type, and it has the potential for high yielding. And in South Africa, at least, it has done very well under warm climate conditions. This is a slide from Alice Beste as well, and they're talking about here that it has basically excellent marketing characteristics. They're looking at a dry matter a range of 22 to 35%, which would be similar to Hass here in California. And they say that it can be earlier than Hass, maybe. But I really like this slide because this tells you the difference. So this is comparing Maluma to Hass, planted on basically a 10 by 20 plant spacing, but you can see the Maluma on the left, and the Hass on the right. So you can see that the trees are planted at the same time, and that they do definitely make a different type of tree structure. This just is a slide that shows that at least under South African conditions, they feel that they have less alternate bearing than with Hass. But we need to test this in California to see what we find in California for sure. And in South Africa, they're hoping that the Maluma and the Hass can supplement each other in terms of market window, with the Maluma having larger account sizes than compared to the Hass. And this just shows you how the fruit look when they ripen. They ripen black very nicely. And this is the kind of crop load you can have. And the nice thing, I wanted to really talk about Maluma, because the other thing that I think that they've done in South Africa that I think is interesting in helping us to imagine the unseen is that they've imagined growing Maluma on a trellis. And by growing the trees in a trellis under high density, you can really boost productivity per acre. And do we have varieties that we can do that? I think we can do that with lamb Hass. I think that it would be interesting to try it out with gem, but definitely with lamb Hass. So I don't want to get too lost here in the woods. But the bottom line here is that I think Maluma has a place. It definitely needs testing in California, throughout California, both in cool and warm conditions, so that we can see if it's a variety for us in California. And so it's available to a limited extent from Brokaw Nursery, and as I indicated, also in the future from Avocado. It's an upright tree, similar to lamb. Minimum dry matter in South Africa is 20%, so it probably will be similar to Hass or lamb Hass here in California. And it's adaptable to high density, and appears to be, at least under South African conditions, more stress tolerant. So with that, the question to ask, is there life beyond Hass or Maluma or gem or anything else that we release in the future? Or should we be content with what we currently have? And you know, we have a breeding program at the University of California, and the question we ask ourselves in running the program and looking for the future is, can we imagine the unseen? Can we imagine what a future avocado tree should look like? And what is our vision? So there are challenges to breeding new avocado varieties. It takes a long time. You're looking for a needle in a haystack. Success rate is low. For every 1,000 seeds you plant, maybe you might see 5 or 10 selections out of those 1,000 that might have some redeeming qualities to take it to the next level of evaluation. And we're trying to find both horticultural and fruit traits in a single selection. And that sometimes we find these beautiful compact trees, but the fruit quality is horrible. Or we can find these wonderful fruit quality attributes, but they don't produce fruit to a very productive, or the trees are gigantic. And you have to ask, well, is that ever going to be commercial? And then the other thing is defining what traits are the most important. that we need. So I see I have a message from, I think probably, so I have a message from one of the people. I won't read that right now. So the challenge for breeding new avocado varieties is that, you know, avocados have a long season. And when you get a seedling tree and you see the first fruit, you have no idea, is that an early fruit? Is it a mid-season fruit, or is it a late fruit? How do we decide when its ideal season is? And so, and the other thing is that you have to ripen the fruit. So you have to go and pick the fruit, take it back to the lab, ripen it, and then evaluate it. And I can tell you that Eric will attest to the fact that he's eaten a lot of really horrible avocados in the attempt of finding that elusive, great eating fruit. The other thing is that eating quality changes throughout the season. And so finding that optimum harvest window, it takes a lot of work. And then the bottom line is that CAS really does set a very, very high standard for both post-harvest and eating quality. So we always have CAS in the back of our mind going, is it as good as CAS? Does that meet the CAS standard? Doesn't have to taste like CAS, but it needs to eat with very high eating quality. So it's a balancing act that we need to meet the need of the grower, because you need to increase productivity. We need to go to high density. We need to get away from picking poles and ladders. We need to be able to have our pickers pick 3-4 bins a day rather than 1 or 1.5 bins per day. But then we have to remember the consumer. And we have to always bear in mind that it is a continuum from the grower to the consumer. And attributes that are important to you as a grower is going to be very different than what potential attributes it is to the consumer. So I did a survey, this is about 2 years ago, where I asked, I sent this email to several people and responded what people consider to be the most important horticultural attributes. And the top 10 traits that came out from a list of 29 is yield efficiency and fruit quality. But buried in there, you see productivity, that goes back to yield efficiency, tree size, that goes back to yield efficiency, alternate bearing, that goes back to yield efficiency, architecture, stress tolerance, it being precocious, that meaning that it produces fruit early on after you plant the tree. You don't have to wait 5 or 6 years to have a highly productive tree, and pests and diseases. But what about eating quality, that elusive thing that says fruit quality? What is fruit quality? Well, if we ask about fruit quality, this is another survey that we did. We come up with all different kinds of attributes for fruit quality. It needs to be smooth. The fruit needs to be creamy. It needs to have a savory flavor. And this year we have found that savory is a descriptor of the moment. Can it be sweet? Is it bitter? There's a lot of things that come into the sensory attributes that we need to pay attention to when we're evaluating this fruit. And so the ultimate goal for the breeding program then is to have enhanced productivity and production efficiency for you as a grower, but we need to have satisfied consumers that will have repeat purchases of whatever we release. And so within the UC breeding program for new varieties, we're trying to use all our available tools available to come up with this ultimate goal, to find new varieties that answer both, that can give maybe 30,000, 40,000 pounds per acre rather than the 15,000 to 20,000 pounds, to have low alternate bearing and have very high fruit quality. So within the breeding program, we do have a range of both dark and green skin varieties that are comparable to CAS in eating quality. And I've talked to you about this before. Our goal is to provide 12-month market coverage. We want to improve tree architecture, and we want to have greater yield efficiency. And UC Riverside has partnered with Green Motion, which is a part of Eurosemias based out of Spain. And they have been generously providing us with funding so that we can actually collect the needed data that we have to release some of this material that has been sitting in our germplasm collections now for several years. And today I'm very happy to talk to you about BL516. BL516 is going to be the first commercial release of this group of material that is going to be licensed to Green Motion. Now, BL516, other name is Marvel. So many of you already know about Marvel. And another name for it, for those that are listening from outside the United States, you've heard me talk about it, is UCRV04. But it's going to be patented under the name of BL516. BL516 is the last selection left over from the Bob Berg breeding era. This was a selection that was left when after Bob and retired, and Guy Whitney left the university, and Gray Martin left the university. And this is a selection that David Stottlemyre and I and Eric felt that warranted further evaluation. And so we have continued evaluating this selection, and we feel that it's ready for prime time for commercial release. So I want to show you a picture. This is a fruit, pictures that were taken this year. So the left side picture is how the fruit appeared, Hass versus BL516. This fruit was harvested from the same block in April of 2022. And down on the right-hand side, you see both Hass and BL516 harvested in August from the same group of trees. So similar to Hass, the BL516 will color on the tree as the season progresses. So it's similar to Hass in that regard. You can see that it is more pear-shaped, at least in Irvine, than Hass. It has a slightly smoother skin than Hass, and it has those yellow flecks similar to gem on the peel of the fruit. I want to talk a little bit about tree characteristics. So it tends to be a very tall, upright tree. The fruit are borne on the inside of the tree. This is some tree size data. So we have trees both in Irvine and up in the San Joaquin Valley. So if we look at, this is tree height. So you can see that on the light blue bar and the light green bar are Hass. The dark blue and the dark green are the BL516. So in Irvine, the trees are as tall as Hass, not as tall as Hass at Lynn Cove. But if we look at the canopy volume, how much space that tree occupies, is that in both locations, the canopy volume of the BL516 is about 45% of that is Hass. Okay, and that's because the canopy width is reduced by about 30 to 35% compared to Hass. So when you take the fact that the tree is more slender and occupy, it means that the canopy volume is smaller. This is a variety that can definitely be planted in high density planting for sure. It's a much narrow upright tree. It's narrower than Lamb Hass, in fact. It's more like a reed, but more upright than reed, actually. If we look at the yield, the statistically similar. So if you compare the overall yield in Irvine and at Lynn Cove, even though the overall yield is less than the Hass, it's non-significant. But bear in mind now that that amount of fruit is being produced on a tree that's only 50% as large as Hass. Also, if we look at alternate bearing, In Irvine, numerically, the alternate bearing is less than on Hass, but it is not significant at Irvine. But the alternate bearing at Lynn Cove in the San Joaquin Valley is significantly less than Hass. So overall, if we take it, I can feel safe to saying you probably will see lower alternate bearing with BL516 than you will with Hass. Will it be as low as Gem? I would say that's probably comparable to Gem in terms of having a lower alternate bearing compared to Hass. The other really great thing that we're excited about Marvel, UCRV04, is that it is a bee flower type. So you've seen that the fruit is Hass-like, the tree is small, and it is a bee flower type. So it can be used as a pollinizer variety for not only Hass, but for Gem, for Lamb Hass, and other A flower types. And, the slide is not showing. I had a slide in here, I must have hidden it. But Eric has tracked the timing of flowering of BL516 with these other A flower types, with Flavia, with Eugenin, with Hass, with Carmen, with Lamb Hass. And it overlaps the flowering season of all these different varieties. So it can be used from a flowering perspective as a potential pollinizer for these different varieties. And I apologize that somehow that slide is not showing. I wanted to talk about a little bit about the fruit traits. So it ripens dark. It may have yellow speckles on the fruit, as you can see here on the right. The fruit is pear-shaped. A distinguishing factor, we talk about the Lamb Hass being sort of square. If you look at the bottom of the BL516, a lot of times it has an indentation on the bottom of the fruit. It peels very easily when it's ripe. Without ethylene, I looked at the data from both 2021 and data we've collected this year in 2022 with ripening of the fruit. It typically will take longer to ripen than Hass, but this year we've been doing some ripening with ethylene, and with ethylene there's very little difference in time to ripe compared to Hass. The fruit does mature later than Hass, and the post-harvest storage data that we've been collecting definitely shows that it has potential equivalent storage life to Hass and perhaps slightly superior, but definitely equal to Hass, which is very good. So here is average fruit size across all the years from Irvine and at Lynn Cove, not statistically different at either site. So it has comparable fruit size to Hass. This is changes in dry matter in Irvine for the 2 different years. And I separated the 2 years, but you can see that the 2 years are different from each other. So in 2021, we harvested the trees 6 different times and stored the fruit up at the Kearney Egg Center to look at post-harvest life. And this was what the dry matter was. So you can see it lags a little bit behind Hass. In 2022, we harvested more often, and we also were able to take the fruit at different points of time and present that fruit to consumer panels with people. And this is work that Claudia Asensio, who is a sensory scientist who's working with us now, shows. So in terms of texture, when we harvest the fruit in January, the overall acceptability up in this up right-hand corner, Hass is superior to BL516. And you can see that is probably because now the dry matter of the fruit was right around 17% in January. And you can see the fruit was perceived to be more watery here and less creamy, and less smooth and creamy than Hass. But when we go to the July harvest and when we did the taste panel, and that's the extreme right here, where you can see that there is no significant difference in the overall acceptability of the 2 varieties. You can see that BL516 is equally smooth and equally creamy compared to the house. It's still perceived as slightly watery than the house, but you can see again very high, very good eating quality, above or like slightly. That's texture. In terms of flavor, what you see again in January, when that dry matter was 17% compared to about 22% with the Hass, the fruit were perceived to be green and grassy, and compared to nutty and sweet for the Hass. When we move to June, to the fruit harvested in June, you can see now that they're both perceived as being very nutty and savory and very little green or grassy. Now we are doing this one more time, and as I speak, the fruit are being tasted at the Kearney Egg Center. So I'll be able to update this slide here in about a couple weeks. So in summary, the BL516 is a tall cylindrical tree adaptable to high density plantings. It does well both in Irvine and in the San Joaquin Valley. We've had trees elsewhere in California, and it has done very well. The tree tends to take off a little bit slow when it's planted in the field because it is a smaller tree. It has very flexible wood, and so I think it would be, if someone wanted to play around with trellising, it would be probably very adaptable to trellising, but also adaptable to very high density planting. It's a bee flower type that can serve as a pollinizer to Hass, gem, or lamb Hass, or any of these other A flower types. It looks like it will have a later harvesting season than Hass. Probably, I'm guessing we need to collect more data, but I'm guessing that the recommendation for the harvest will probably be sometime in April through July, August. It holds on the tree into August quite well. It has good fruit characteristics. It has a small, moderate seed, has good peelability, good storage potential, and it does respond to ethylene when you try to ripen the fruit. And so we're very excited that we're anticipating a commercial release of this variety to the California grower in spring of next year. And I know that Joyce Petrona is physically at the meeting in Ventura, and she can answer questions to people if they have any questions about that. So we're very, very happy and appreciative to Green Motion for their funding of the project so that we can take this variety and other varieties that we have, as you can see here, to commercial release. So the future is at one endless bowl of guacamole. I think collectively we have a lot of challenges collectively as a world industry. We have long transit time, and logistics have been a big problem, especially in the COVID-19 era. We like to stay in our comfort zone in Hass, but do we need to imagine the unseen? We're dealing with climate change, no doubt about it, with shortages of water and extreme heat situations. So we need new material, both rootstocks and varieties that will take us into the future. And we do need to be mindful that we have pests and diseases lapping at our door, and laurel wilt is in the United States, and we need to be mindful and work very hard to keep laurel wilt out of California. And then germplasm conservation. We need to conserve what we have in California, and we need to support conservation efforts of places where the avocado has its center of diversity, which is primarily Mexico. So I think I'll end that. I just want to put a plug in for Avocado Cafe as well. And that we'll be having a meeting on the 30th of August. So thank you very much for your attention.
Any questions?
curious, near the beginning of the presentation, there was a slide that showed how the marketing or availability of the fruit had essentially changed from a more broader to a peaking kind of a construct with more summer essentially fruit. Was that more due to the availability of certain breeds of fruit or a marketing issue, or just why that was so?
Did you hear that, Mary?
I did. Yeah. So for the people on Zoom, the question is at the beginning of the talk, I showed that graph where you showed the compression of when we market our fruit. I think it's due to a number of reasons. Back it was more flat. We did have more varieties that we were being marketed. The San Joaquin Valley had more production still at that point in time in part of that window. But I think the other thing is that during that period of time, even if we think about Hass, that the commercial release date for Hass is December 12th for an 8-ounce fruit. You would never think today about harvesting an 8-ounce Hass avocado in December because we don't have the fruit quality. There's better fruit quality from our sources outside the United States bringing fruit in. And so actually our market competition for Hass, this is Mary Lou Arpaia's take on things, is that it's forced us to go back into when the original patent of Hass said that the market window for the fruit quality window for Hass was April through June. And sure enough, that's where we're picking most of our fruit because now we're forced, we need to put a higher quality fruit on to the marketplace in order to compete with Colombia, Mexico, and Peru.
There's another question over here.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the climate differences between Irvine and Linco.
What are the
The climate difference. So what are the climate differences between Irvine and Linco? So Irvine is a nice coastal environment. Think of Ventura. And the San Joaquin Valley is very, very hot. Today it's 106 outside. And I don't think that we've probably only had 5 or 6 days below 100 for the past month and a half here. And the nights are very hot, very warm. The nighttime temperatures rarely go below 65 during the summer. And in the winter, we can be much colder than the Irvine. And so it's quite different. It's very hot and dry in the summer and very cold. It can be very cold in the winter. The other thing is that we've just completed, and I'm finalizing the report on a maturity project for a gem avocado for the maturity release date. And avocados up here mature much faster than they do in the San Joaquin Valley, in Southern California. For instance, the proposed release date for the gem will be in early December for the San Joaquin Valley, and it will be in February for Southern California. That gives you an idea of the difference in this heat load that we have and the maturation of the fruit, because the trees up in the San Joaquin Valley tend to flower in a more compressed time zone a little bit later than Southern California, but they mature a lot faster.
Eric, do you want to read some of the chat questions?
Yeah, let me take a look here. A lot of them were about not seeing the presentation, but there was a question about, okay, there's a lot of questions. You answered the one about the window of gem in the San Joaquin Valley. What about exporting gem to Asia?
Well, I'm not a marketer. I think that gem has the potential to take that boat trip if it's handled correctly. I think we don't want to be too greedy and hold the fruit too late on the tree, because In the storage work we did last year and this year, from fruit from Irvine, for instance, the seed has no problem germinating, just like CAS. The fruit has no problem having a breakdown after a long time in storage. So it has a storage life potential similar to Hass. So, but you don't want to be shipping late season fruit, whether it's Hass or Lamb Hass or a gem or BL516. You want to say, so my job as a post-harvest person is to tell you that definition of when that the storageability window is of the fruit. But yeah, I think, that's the marketing people have to tell you that one. I can't tell you that one, but I think that it can take a boat ride for sure if it's properly handled.
Okay, we had another question about girdling to modify cropping patterns within the trees. Do you have any input on that?
Girdling works if you do it the right time of year. We did a very large project at ACW in Fallbrook. Oh, this is like, you were just working for me, so it was a long time ago.
I just started, yeah.
Yeah, like 25 years ago. And, when you girdle a branch, you shift the fruit production to that branch. So you're not making the tree overall more productive. What you're doing is you're shifting the production to that branch. And that allows maybe some canopy management strategies. But, you have to really know what you're doing. You have to do it at the right time of year if you're going to enhance flowering. Maybe Ben will have more words of wisdom than I do.
I'll pass.
Okay, pass. All right, we got a question in the audience here again, then we'll get back to the Zoom.
The Carmen Hass variety seems to have this, the off-season set that you get on that variety. Do you see that as having potential to extend our season for the Hass genetics, if you will, or the fruit sold as Hass?
Did you hear that? So the question was, the Carmen off bloom, is there potential to extend the Hass market or Hass-like market for California?
So we have Carmen at the trial that we have in Ventura. And some years we have an off bloom crop, some years we don't. Almost every year that fruit is nailed by thrips. So I would say here in California, no, but I don't have any commercial acreage, and there may be growers out there that are taking advantage of Carmen from that regard. I have to say we have Carmen in our planting in the San Joaquin Valley, and we haven't had any off bloom in the San Joaquin Valley on Carmen. So the Carmen is acting just like a Hass, except that you can see the difference in the tree architecture very clearly. You could see that very clearly when I was out there this week.
You've got a comment here.
Another question.
Yeah, Mary Lou, this is Sal. I have about 3,000 Carmen trees, and I consistently get about 3 sets a year. And the difference was when I first planted them, I treated them like Hass, and they were terrible. And later on, I was advised to feed them a bit more, and they came to life. And I consistently get 3 sets. And my ranch is between Santa Paula and Fillmore, as you know.
Oh, great.
Anyway,
Well, that's great, Sal. Thank you for the input, because that's a real grower's experience.
Okay, I'm going to go back into the chat. What rootstocks are the Maluma trials planted on? What are they planted on in South Africa?
In South Africa, what I've seen, they have them planted on a variety of rootstocks. One rootstock that Alice Beste likes is the Bounty rootstock. The Bounty rootstock, I've been told, is in California. It's been imported by Avocado, and it's in quarantine. And so hopefully here in the future that we'll be able to test Bounty as a rootstock in California. But I know in going to the Maluma days that they had in South Africa, they had rootstock trials with Duke 7 and Duza, Bounty, and some other rootstocks. And the Maluma I remember right, the Maluma performed the best on Bounty, but also did very well on Duza. But we need, you know, we need to get some trials of Maluma out in California, because Maluma is, I think, because we're not shipping fruit to a large extent outside the U.S., I think that it definitely has an opportunity for us to help augment seasonality of the fruit, and to figure out whether it's actually can be earlier here in California, as it is claimed in some situations to be in South Africa.
Okay. Any idea how BL516 might perform in a cooler climate, perhaps like New Zealand?
That's a great question. I think that it should do all right. I think it should do all right. The one thing I've noticed is that it gets out of the gate very slow, so you're gonna have to baby the trees a little bit. But if you can get the trees to establish, and maybe it's because, you know, we're trying to grow them like house trees, so you know they're wimpier than a house tree. But once the trees are established, like at Lynn Cove, we didn't lose it. We lost maybe 1 or 2 trees out of 15 when we planted them, and at Irvine we didn't lose any, and they just take a little bit longer to establish themselves. But I think that they have high potential for a high density planting, and I sort of would foresee maybe if you were planting them with gem or lamb hass, that you would plant a whole row of BL516 and not interplant them. And I think if you were going to go in at in an existing hass grove, you would want to pay attention to, you might want to top work them into the grove rather than plant new trees, because I think a new tree might get overwhelmed by an existing large hass planting. But I think, again, if you were planting a new hass planting, I would consider planting a whole row of BL516 rather than the typical every other tree, every other row, because I think it might be very difficult to manage those trees, getting them established, if you manage the grove as a house grove.
So
Nowhere to go.
Nathan Lurie, who's the president of the Avocado Society, has organized a group of growers, and he's going to feed them questions and then bat those questions out into the...
The reason that we are doing this panel, I think, is, the main reason is that all the charts and graphs and the research is great, but it doesn't really matter if you get out in the field and it doesn't do anything for you. So we want to hear directly from the growers how these different varieties are performing and get some of their personal take and experience. I've been an avocado grower for about 10 years myself, which is nothing in the experience realm compared to a lot of people in this room. In my career, it's been pretty much just hass. Now we're dabbling more into gem, but we got here through a lot of years of experimentation. Fuerte, Bacon, Pinkerton, Lamb Hass, these all came and gone, and I think the reason that we are here with hass and with gem is because of all that experimentation, finding what works, what doesn't, and help focus our efforts on what matters. What's going to work here in our specific climate, soils, water. So let's invite the panelists up. We have Henry Dominguez. We already invited Mike Sullivan. Can we see everybody over here? Or doesn't have to be trained out of here. Well, let's do a little. You'll have to read that back. Yeah. So we'll just do a quick little introduction. If you can just share your name, maybe your general ranch locations, and what varieties you grow. Let's start over here with him.
Good afternoon, everybody.
My name is Henry Dominguez. My branches are just west of Santa Paula, not quite halfway to Ventura. As a point of reference for any questions or anything, any answers I may share, I'm the one that has the high density gem planting off of 126 just west of Breeks Road. On the ranches we have some lemons and CAS as well, but we have a big bet on the gem, and we've our plantings we did it over a course of 4 years, and going from 2018 to last year. So we're getting into some decent production from those first 2 years planting. Just to give you an idea from the conversations today, our rootstock on the gem is all Toro Canyon, and doing very well for us in terms of our soil and productivity per tree. And that one of the suggested comments was based on our water supply isn't an issue. We're part of Farmers Irrigation, which is a very well run, reliable company. So water isn't an issue for us. The issues that we do face from a production standpoint, and it has to do more with our topography and where we're located in the valley. Cold is my biggest concern. Weather is in general, but cold more than heat, and now cost of fertilizers as far as the cultivation practices go.
Okay. Thank you. Mike?
Hi, my name is Mike Sullivan. I farm around the county, Somas, Satacoy, Santa Paula, a lot in Ojai. I grow all of the commercial varieties. We have some of the older Pinkerton plantings all the way to lots of gems. Nothing compared to the Dominguez's, but I think some of the varieties, I think the thing I'd speak about here is I grow a fair amount of reeds. And I like reeds, and the thing I would say about avocado varieties is one way of looking at them is yield breaker, right, and return on investment, and sort of that line of thought, which is valid and important to all of you. Another is how do you distinguish it in the marketplace, right? We talk a lot about CAS-like varieties. Just my own feeling about it is I like non-CAS varieties, and I think there's a space for that, just as there's a space for green apples and there's a space for red apples. So that's my 2 cents.
Hi, my name is Sean Martin. We're a small grower, about 9 acres up on the Rincon Mountain in northern Ventura County here at an elevation of about 1,300 feet on the south slope. Very warm, early ripening area. We get our water from Lake Casitas. Water is good quality. Cold isn't an issue in my area. Wind and heat would be more the stressing factors. We grow the reed, Carmen Hass, Lamb Hass, and some gem now. Or the basic same commercial varieties. But being a small farm, I like that having some harvest outside of the main Hass, trying to bring money coming into the farm outside of the main crop always seems to help. And some of these other varieties I like as well for variety. They're great eating. There's also other great varieties besides Hass. The productivity and the tree architecture as well, being somewhat smaller and columnar and whatnot, I think is beneficial. I think thinking about these things is there's room for this other stuff. Part of my thoughts are, though, when they come to market, if we expand our window, we need to be able to get a good price for the fruit. I think is something that needs to be considered a lot, because currently I'm producing some of these other varieties, but is there good pay in that market because you're competing with a lot of the foreign stuff? So food for thought there.
Hey, my name is Jose Alcaraz, and I work for Brokaw Ranch Company for my whole life. And we are managing about 250 acres, some of that, 200 acres, 250 acres. And we got probably about 20%, 25% gem. And we got some Carmens, and we are located in Santa Paula, about 1,500 feet sea elevation. Well, our worst problem is we got a wind. Wind is our major problem. And right now we got a big problem with the deers. We close the mountain. We're very remote, so they're very problematic in this situation. But yeah, we irrigate under drip irrigation, and we got some pretty much about 80% all in berms, and we got a high density. So and all those and high density and middle density, not too high. And so we try to compare the production and body of the flow from the body of the tree, so last longer the fruits. Yeah, but that's what we do.
Very good. And yeah, I'm curious more about how you guys irrigate your trees and how you determine what spacing and what variety or rootstock you're using. Is it based on the variety that you want, or is it based on the soils when you're choosing different rootstocks?
As far as the decisions made when we first developed the property, really it was talking to the experts, whether it was at Brokaw or people with experience like my brother. But we decided on the rootstock based on our soil. Obviously, the rootstock discussion is great, but you make that decision once for 30 years. And so it's very important to be well informed in terms of what's going to work for you. And it's worked very well. I think the information collected and decisions made have paid off for us so far. We went with berms from the very beginning, and I think they do very well, both in terms of the irrigation practices. All the gems, all the new plantings are on drip, and we think it's very efficient as well as good for the trees. And the berms, I think, also promote the growth of the tree. I've gotten different rationales behind it, but I see it both in terms of our berms, the Brokaw's berms, as well as Limonera and some of the lemons they do. The growth of the trees seems to be really pushed along with large berms. And from a irrigation standpoint, really we've introduced sensors, so we're trying to make decisions on based on soil moistures and that. But generally, it's once a week. In summer, maybe a second shorter watering, depending when it's really hot. But fortunately, we don't get that hot. So I find that the density question is really, in terms of production and your final results on the yield, is driven by the variety, obviously, and its characteristics, but then the decision to be made in terms of what's your density tolerance or your objective. And in today's world, I think the more dense that you're willing to go, the better. But we all make our own decisions, and so the spacing is important in terms of how many trees you have, which will drive the yield you have, because the tree is only going to produce so much. And so how many trees you have per acre, I think, is a key decision in the whole process in terms of what your final yield is going to be.
And what is your count per acre for those plantings?
Today it's 520. My spacing is 13 feet, every 6 row 18, with between rows and 6 feet in the row. If I had in all future plantings, I'll probably go 6 feet. I think 6 feet's a good distance for me, a tolerable distance for the gem and how it and its tree characteristics. But in the future, I'll probably go 15 feet on the rows, so I can get down every row with a narrow tractor fairly comfortably.
Well, since we're talking about gem, maybe you guys can share the style of planting that you have for your gem. Are you on berms?
We have some older gems. I think they're 7 or 8 years old, and they're on higher, wider gems. or gyms, higher, wider berms. We mulched the heck out of them, and they do well. I think there's a lot. No, they're on mini sprinklers on Netafim super nets. In the next year, we'll be developing 17 acres of gems on a similar tree per acre as Henry mentioned. They'll be on berms and they'll be drip. So the patterned after what Brokaw's done in one.
Are you sure?
The gym that we've planted is since the Thomas fire, so it's fairly new planting. On micro sprinkler, all our trees are on micro sprinkler because we're organic and pushing a lot of the fertilizers are very viscous. So micro sprinkler, I think, is a better option for organic agriculture or for organic avocado. We don't do berms. It's very steep terrain, so it's very well drained as it is. Scheduling, I mean, trying to save water in our drought, but running about 9 hours or so every 12 days roughly right now or so. So not super frequent. Really been trying to make sure I'm watering at night a lot of times to avoid loss as much as possible. The gem seems very hard to establish. A lot of the stuff seemed to get really beat up, much slower to establish than the Hass, at least from what I've seen. They were on Duke 7, the ones that we planted, and much slower to start than Hass trees that were planted at the same time. I noticed they're a little bit harder to get going, and they have that kind of soft habit that the lamb Hass or the reed has, very weepy branches and stuff, so they need a bit more support, and you skirt them and they come right back down to the ground. So if you want to keep a nice uniform irrigation pattern, you're into a bit more work establishing them versus the Hass, or compared to the Carmen, which is very upright and stiff branches where once you skirt it, it's good. You don't really need to come back to it. So I think that's maybe all I've been
the original gem we have, but they're not in berms, but we irrigated under drip irrigation. And we irrigating about 20 gallons per irrigation. That's about 40 gallons per week. Normally temperature and the heat wave of about 90s. So we add another probably couple hours. So just to get a drink. But normally it's about 40 gallons per week. And those and all gem and it's all depends on this. I do a stock roots all the tree, the gem we planted in 2019. Those gem, they have a hard time to produce, and then finally this year we have a good crop, and then so since we added more fertilizer to where we planted this very poor soil and limestone and so all those so now finally they got a good crop. And it's a water that all depends how much crop you have in the tree. Some tree it had no fruit, so we don't irrigate the same as others. So we're really watching the water usage. So we just put it in the trees really producing. Yeah. So that's what we do. And then for those gem, the worms, they're producing, since we planted, producing about 18,000 pounds per acre. We got a 1 acre, so just like that. So that's the original gem. Those being planted in 2008.
So what's the density?
Those are 16 by 10.
Okay.
Those are the first we were trying to high density planting, and then since we saw that they're too wide, so we planted another in between. So yeah, but the really ones produced that original trees, original 10 by 15.
What do you think about berms versus no berms? You know, a lot of times the berms seem like makes the tree grow a lot faster, but it sounds like in your experience, you've seen good results on the gem without berm.
Well, I think it does depend. Sorry, that does depend on the soil we got. So in that area, we shaded all the original. There was a canyon in there. We shaded all the topsoil. We to leveling, and that's what there was all the pearl soil. Yeah, remember that? Yeah, it was that. But it's all pretty much a good soil. But in northern, I think berms, it's very important, very important for in our situation.
I think I'd say it's important. I mean, it's site specific. I have gems that are planted about the same time. They're literally next door neighbors, and some are on berms and some are on the ground. It's rocky soil. It's very well drained, and they're performing about the same. But in another place, I wouldn't plant for anything. Would I not plant on berms? Because the way the drainage is they really need the berms. And so it's a question that everybody's going to have to ask for themselves. And you have significantly larger development costs. It's more expensive if you're going to do berms, especially if you're on a hill or in some of the places where berms are going in now. So do you berm? Do you not berm? Depends on which. It's a broader question.
I saw a couple of questions came in on the chat there. And also, if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise a hand and get it out there. It's open kind of discussion.
So what's your pruning experience in high density gems?
Yes, we are pruning. We sacrifice some fruit because since we harvesting, it's already set fruit. But we always pruning the branch. It has previous fruit. So the one that has previous year fruit. That's what we prune. I know it's some mostly that they're single branch, but so that's we don't prune those. But the one has single, another branch has fruit. We prune that branch.
Are you girdling?
No, not Jim.
The gem has different pruning needs. We're talking about the skirts. I think the first couple of years you need to skirt because it'll keep growing. But then from there it seems to not then go to the bottom. And then from a high density standpoint, this year we're going to have to top our trees because we're getting to a height. Then both from a sunlight as well as a harvesting strategy that we're going to employ. So we need to start topping them. And then also in high density, because of the narrow rows, we're also going to start limiting the width of the tree. And so cutting the tips that are starting to either block the row or reach over to the other trees. So there's different pruning needs for the gem. And that's really the biggest difference. The Haas can be very labor intensive as it grows and you're taking off whole limbs and that it also loses production. So I think there's just differences from the tree in terms of its growth characteristics as well as the high density, the need to manage high density.
So are you removing single branches all the way to the trunk, or are you just heading it back somewhat?
Right now we're just cutting it back, and then in the next year or two we'll start taking single branches for rejuvenation as well.
Also heard from a lot of people planting gems. They have a very hard time the first year because they get them in the ground one summer and then the next year they flower, and they flower so much, they're so precocious that they pretty much try to kill themselves. So have you guys experienced any of that? And how did you combat that?
You prune off some of the flower.
Prune off some
I
of the
mean,
flower.
what's a tree is what $40 a tree now, right? So if it's the tree or year two's production, what's
what's the right choice.
Do you just plan on doing that, or is that based on the flower you see?
It depends on the tree, right? Often when you have a younger tree that's overflowering like that, the correct thing to do is don't cut some of the flower for, to preserve the tree.
For us, what we find is that the gem, when it overflowers like that and loses its foliage, it's because it's been stressed. So for us, we had a couple of cold spots in the parts of the blocks that received the cold, they would overflower and didn't produce. So limiting the stress on the tree, whether it's irrigation, as well as the stresses of heat or cold, those things are harder to control. But when the tree's not stressed, it'll flower a lot. And our experience is in year 2, in the areas where we didn't have stressed trees, we were harvesting about 3 to 4 pounds a tree. And in year 3, we've gotten as much as close to 30 pounds a tree. In year 4, it's up above 40 pounds. So limiting the stress on the tree. Some people say, stressing CAS will give you greater yield. With a gem, I think that's the opposite, right? So you want to keep it as happy and healthy as you can, and the flowering won't be an issue. It's the defoliaging, I think, that creates the problem.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any thought about doing windrows? Because I think of them with setting inside and the rubbing. And I know they did an experiment trying to do little shields around them and stuff like that. And I was wondering if there was any discussion like windbreaks or something like that, so that there is.
In pollinizers, Sutano as windbreaks, just to get the Sutanos in there for the pollination as well. But the reality is that the gems actually do better with the wind. You have less fruit loss because the tree doesn't. My observation is the tree doesn't whip around as much, and any rub you do get, it didn't affect our grading, our packouts. Our packouts were still same year to year, one windy year versus another. So wind, the gem actually performs better. At least it has for us in the wind, and the packouts were not affected from the areas where we did see some wind rubs.
Would this marble be a good? Because seeing the pictures, it looks almost Dr. Susie where it was tall and skinny.
Yeah, I think
and
marbles.
Something like that.
She's saying no.
No,
No?
it's an upright tree, but it's slow growing.
Okay.
So if you wanted a windrow, you find something like this Zutano or bacon. It's just like that. So I wouldn't recommend it as a windrow.
So Marvel's not recommended as a windbreak. It's not fast growing.
Maybe a pollinizer.
Yeah, maybe a good pollinizer, but look at Zutano or eucalyptus.
Any other comments on the wind protection?
We are in our area, like we say, that our wind that's our worst problem, and we use some shade cloth, 50% mesh, and chicken wire, so it'll be protected. It helps to not rip the wind. And that really, we experimented with this to put it last year, and so we haven't received a very strong wind, like a 70 miles per hour. But so far, trees growing okay. We've never the data, those trees never produce at all. Never produce at all. So since the 1990, we planted those trees, never produced. And then when it got fired, they got burned. So and then we plant gem. With gem, we planted those in 2019 and never produced. So we used to install last year those windbreak, and those trees really have coming back. It really has some. And I hope it's not going to be any heavy wind at all. I hope it stays, but it works for us. Yeah.
Oh, should we talk about gem the whole time or other varieties too?
I have 2 questions. One has to do with gems. How would you compare water per pound of fruit for a gem versus a hop? Or do you have any sense on being more efficient, less efficient per pound of fruit?
And that also might be how efficient is water use on high density versus low density.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Our experience is, because we have, on one of the properties, we have 12 acres of jam and 11 acres of Haas. And, but the difference is one is drip and one is sprinklers. And our production on the jam is 3 times as much as the Haas, and the water is about the same. So for what it's worth, based on our experience.
And what about fertilizer? Are you guys fertilizing?
It's the same.
The same?
Right, I have a second question about the Carmen Haas. I'm very intrigued by that. What is its harvest window? It has 3 flowers a year.
Year round.
I was gonna say, you're right.
Year round.
Carmen Hassey harvest year round.
Generally, it's a.
Which packing house takes it year round?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying.
I'm saying you can harvest year round. I'm not saying that's what you end up doing.
Yeah, right now it seems like gem is the main like secondary variety that now packing houses are looking at, but with all these other varieties, they have their spot, they have their niche, but you have to do your marketing, you have to do your sales.
Nathan, just to ask, like, what is the likelihood for you growers to try new cultivars or new rootstocks?
I think for me, new rootstocks is tough. I'd echo something Henry said earlier, which is you're making an investment for a long time, right? And when you talk to the guys that have been all around for a while, they can rattle off all the rootstocks that have come and gone. And so it's hard. You know, we have some standards that we've seen work in particular circumstances. And so it's pretty hard as an owner, or especially if you're in a position as a manager, to suggest to somebody else, you know, go with this other thing. I mean, the numbers that you guys put up look great. I mean, I would love to have that extra production, but I don't trust it, right? It's sort of it's at Irvine, it's in Lincoln, it's in these other circumstances that aren't real. I manage Mary Lou's trial right now over in Satakoy, and I like Toro Canyon at that ranch. You know, it's safe. I know where I'm going, and it's a lot to ask to put yourself out in that other way.
2 questions. Mike, where do you sell your weed and what kind of pricing you get on it? And for the whole panel, how did it go this year for your pricing on the gems?
You want me to go first? I'm selling my reeds right now. I hope the buyers aren't listening. Some of them are paying $2.25 a pound, and some of them are paying $2 a pound. I price it as premium fruit because I believe it's premium fruit. Mary Lou and Eric are coming tomorrow to harvest their trial. That fruit will go to the packing house for pennies because it's not ready. It's not good enough to sell into what we're doing right now. Our market is okay, right? We're not, what I do with reeds is a you know, the speck on a fly compared to California avocados, and even smaller compared to, you know, national avocados. But there's a space for that. I guess you've given me the floor for this a little bit. A plug to the Avocado Society. A few years ago, they hosted the trip that we went on together to Mexico. And the thing that I left that trip with more than anything was that Mexico, Peru, these places with lower production costs and better climates and growing conditions can take our lunch when they want. You know, we saw that in July this year, right? We have this incredible market, and Peru dumps a bunch of crap fruit, and the market falls out. It's hard to develop new varieties. It's hard to develop new markets. But it's the thing as California growers, as a sort of collective group, that we really need to be looking at. Is gem one of those? Well, it certainly performs on a per acre return basis. But when I go to the grocery store, gems, Hass, lamb Hass, Peruvian fruit, California fruit, they're all thrown together. I've said this before. I think there's a lesson for the marketers in what Mandarin growers have done, right? every mandarin now is a halo or a cutie. Well, halos and cuties are 3 or 4 different varieties, but they've captured those. They've given themselves an advantage in the market through branding and through a certain level of quality, which I think is important. So, did I answer your question? $2 and $2.25, depending on how much they're buying right now.
I have a question about Reed. One thing that I saw this year was the release date on the Reed was, I think the 32s and larger were released in like May.
That's insane. That's insane. And I laughed sorry, Mary Lou, I laughed when I heard her say that San Joaquin Valley gems would be released in December. It's a race to the bottom. You're not going to convince me otherwise. Quality wins. On price, Mexico is going to always win. They're going to kill us. If you want to stick around in the long term, we have to come up with something where California branded avocados are better. And somebody in Detroit knows that. I feel really strongly about that. So that's sort of the challenge I propose.
From our standpoint, I think I'll add to what he's saying, and I'm kind of in the same school of thought. But we fortunately this year it was our first year of having some good production based on our trees, the tree count that we have, and at the same time we had a good year from a pricing standpoint in the market as a whole, and so so we had a good year as a whole. But the provocation that I would give everybody in the room and everybody that would listen is that we need, as we look at varieties, in addition to the rootstocks and everything, but the varieties in particular, which is what the consumer ends up with, we need to really look at this and create a point of difference for Mexico, so that when Mexico, or Peru for that matter, chooses to dump a bunch of fruit, that we're able to kind of ride the wave above them, because the retailer and the consumer knows that we're going to deliver, or our fruit is better quality. And the reason that it's frustrating for a grower is that when you look at the consumer and what they're paying for a lamb has, and a gem in general is the same. The margin pool's the same. And why the grower should end up with a smaller piece of the pie just because it's a different variety, and decision made in the room that we're not in is not the right decision. Now, the good news is there are a couple packers out there that I'm seeing, marketers, that are taking the gem seriously. I wish they would do the same with the lamb. And the price range that growers were receiving was 40 and 50 cents during that window in May, June, when prices were very stable. And so there are packers that are taking the variety seriously and marketing it in the way it should be. And it has enough characteristics in the fruit where it can eventually be marketed as a premium fruit. But let's say right now, let's look at what the consumer's paying for the product, and the grower should be getting his share of that margin pool established by the benchmark, which is the HOTS. And so longer term, and the packers, when we sell to them, to explain to us why we have to take the cut if they're making the decision to sell for less. And there are packers on $2.30 a pound net versus some others that were returning $1.90 a pound net. And so it's the organizations out there that have the good sales departments that are aggressive in their selling effort, and getting the retailers to take a California product with all its benefits, and then a product like the gem, which has additional characteristics that I think are favorable when it comes to the consumer. So varieties can help us extend our season. Varieties can help us provide a better quality product, or different things like the thickness of the peel or the creaminess, or other things that the consumer may be interested in, size, for example. And creating a point of difference, enough of a point of difference where both the retailer and the retailer driven by the consumer, start to look for us even more so than us just being a me too or an add-on or a filler with a Haas, filling Mexico's gas out there. And we need to challenge the packing houses to do that because the consumer's paying the same price or more in some cases. And we have those documented. So why is the grower getting a smaller cut of the margin pool?
Well, and to add to that, as a consumer, because I am one who, even though I have a tree and I work for people with trees, I still buy fruit and I buy it to see what it looks like. And when you cut into, something that's been, that's coming up from Mexico and you cut into it, and yet 3/4 of it goes into the trash can because it's unusable versus a really nice thing that you can scoop out the whole piece of fruit. I mean, that's the way to kill a market as far as I'm concerned is when it's all going in the trash can, what good is it?
That was probably Peru. And I think one point to stress is this isn't about, it's creating a point of difference. Mexico was good for the industry. It provided a year-round supply that then turned it into a staple for the consumer versus a seasonal product. And so Mexico being the 800-pound gorilla isn't bad. It's good. It's just that we need to create a point of difference to get our
whether it's storage or whatever, where it's so messed up by the time it's coming home. It looks nice on the outside and it's unusable.
What do you think? I mean, it seems like now the American consumers, they know avocados, they love avocados. I don't think that's going anywhere.
If you think, like right now, for example, I've got reed fruit hanging excellent quality, and I've got Carmen Hass fruit that are excellent quality, but I think you'd be able to get better money for the reed because you're differentiating from what's coming in from elsewhere. The Carmen is expanding the window because I'm very early maturation. I'm done picking in June every year. July, it is falling off the trees. I can start picking in December, but I have a problem with late season. So the reed fits that, but so does the Carmen's off bloom. I'm getting reliable fruit. But which one are you going to be able to differentiate with? And the same goes for the lamb. I just finished picking lambs and I caught the good prices right before they sank there, but I'm a very early maturing place. So as soon as the gate was open, I kicked them all down the way. So I think that's something to consider too. It's, well, if we're going to expand, do we want to expand on the same Hass, which is a J. Carmen, or do we really, if we collectively maybe grow more reeds and more lambs and more gems and such, then I think we gain that differentiation that I think could be beneficial to us. So either that or we have to convince people to sell our fruit in December, and that's what's we get in a weird thing because I could pick the new season's crop in December, but these Carmen Hass are fruit that's set in the fall, so they're now I could pick them September or so, a year from when they set, September, October, but you could essentially hold those in and start picking them as next year's early seed. It's kind of where does it fit in there, I guess, is what you're looking at. You've got this fruit that's available all of a sudden that the packers look at you, well, what do we do with this? Do you mark it as last season's fruit or the next season's fruit? It doesn't fit the box that we have for a season, in a sense, that you're producing a Hass fruit, but it's not produced in, it was set it wasn't set in the spring, it was set in the fall. So you wind up with fruit that's essentially ready at the end of that season, or it could really be carried over and sold in the next season, even though it's part of last year, if you will.
I would say even with the Carmen, even the flavor profile changes from the Four Loko to the normal.
I don't know about that.
I think differentiation there is the others.
It's a Hass. I mean, more or less, it's a sport, right? If I'm not mistaken, it's genetically the same fruit and same genetics. So I haven't noticed much of a flavor difference. It has a slightly different shape to me, and not much other in the tree architecture. The structure of the tree is much different, but they seem to produce well. And I'm getting a reliable, like Sal says, I'm getting reliable fruit outside of the normal window, but I'm just not quite sure what to do with that fruit. Or we need more everybody on board to change the dynamics of the market there.
Consuelo, you asked earlier if we would try other varieties. I'd try another variety if it was different, meaning like I really do think that there's space, like I said to start this, that there's red apples and green apples, right? Something that the consumer walks in and is clearly not CAS. We ran into this problem where, some of the marketers are even marketing gems as CAS. When you go into the store, the produce guy doesn't care, right? He's often underpaid and poorly treated. So he's just putting them in the same place. They're avocados. But if you have something that is different, it's not a practical variety, but the thing that I sell on a local level that gets people the most excited are Pueblas. People love Pueblas. Why? Because they're black and shiny and they don't look like a Hass and they're new. They're different. It's not Hass like, 1, 2, 3. It's something else, and it broadens their horizons and gets them excited about avocados. I think there's a lot of room for that.
I concur. I think we can all agree that differentiating ourselves from Mexico is the key to our success. And it goes back to one of the original the first presentations of today, which is all of the import agreements are based on Hass. So myself as a grower, I have a big debt to service. And I hear the excitement about Pueblas or Reeds or this or the other, but I have to look at what is going to provide the greatest return to me and grow that at a scale that I can truly depend on that. But going back to one of the things that my brother's saying is we need to challenge. We have to remember all the marketers that we're using are the biggest importers in the market as well. The resistance that we have heard or are feeling with the gem itself is tremendous from all these marketers. They really don't want to educate the buyer at the retail level on the new thing or whatever. It's upon us to put pressure on them or to put pressure on CAC. Or to build it yourself. Right, but as a unit, we have CAC, for example, as in the Avocado Society, as our loudspeakers, and they're the ones we need to also put pressure on differentiating us. And for example, the gem is currently the one thing that a California producer can't offer the consumer in the United States that no one else can offer to them. No other country can bring in gems under the current agreements and offer it to the American consumer. So there's one point of difference, but we need to encourage CAC and our marketers to help us and get together ourselves to develop a differentiation program that truly will separate us. Otherwise, we're just a flea on a very big dog.
Well, we talked about this in a meeting once before, right? I think there's a model for this that exists. The cat's out of the bag a little bit on it, but however that saying goes. Sumos, right? Those guys maintain a marketing strategy, right? And they have a special piece of fruit that's now available to other people, but it's a sumo or it doesn't exist. Nobody else markets decapons, right? You could plant them, good luck to you. They're sumos. So as far as gems, I think if a group of growers got together and had a special thing and worked their own deal with a packing house, the packing houses are probably listening, hating me, then maybe there's a way forward in that. But that would be building it yourself.
My approach to varieties is slightly different in that as I plant more avocado acres, which I will in the next several years, right now nothing compares to what I've seen in our current planting of gems. But another objective I have is to try to spread the season. And so if Maluma harvests earlier, like in December, and so both from a cash flow standpoint, as well as if it has the same growing characteristics and production with the right rootstock that the gem does, and it sounds like it does based on the data, then I'd be interested in a variety that's going to help me extend my season so that it spreads my workload as well as my cash flow throughout the year. And that's because we're talking about some large volume. I like the idea of developing and selling small. But I think we need to also look at volume from a volume standpoint.
pushing for non-cost, is that sentiment, does that represent California growers, or is that more unique to a couple of growers here?
It's probably me.
And how likely are you then to try a new cultivar?
You mean a cultivar pass, or what's that?
Oops, sorry. Just in general.
You mean a scion?
I'm sorry, yes.
Repeat the question. No, could you repeat the question?
Right, so I have two. So I've heard the comment about, wanting a new scion that's non-cost to differentiate California industry from other countries, right? And so that's the first question. The question is, does that represent a few growers here, or is that more the general sentiment of California industry?
So would there be, what you're asking? Yes. How many growers would be interested in adopting a new variety? Is it 10% of the grower population, 100%, 0%?
Depends on what phase. I think that's what it comes down to for everybody is it depends on what kind of money you can take back out of it. When it comes down to it, it's a business for everybody. And if you can't, if there's not, it's difficult to get a new variety in when there's not a market established and you don't know what you're going to get. And that's why there's been this move towards all the Hass-like varieties, because if they're like Hass, we can market them like Hass, and we can get similar returns to Hass in theory. And so I think that's why we're kind of stuck in that lane going towards that. There's not new green skins that are coming out that people are really excited about.
Hold on a second. That's the problem. And in fact, right? More green skins.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I totally agree. There's not well, and that's because what did we get this year if you picked a Zutona?
You didn't get anything. I mean, you get garbage. Sure.
Zero. And so that's why the industry as a whole has gone towards that. And I think you're slowly seeing Jim and Reed and Glamhouse people expanding out, but there's still some hesitancy because, again, like Henry said, you're making a decision for 30 years. What's the best bet right now? Right now, ask Jim and Jim. Or probably the
I think
the average grower is not doing their own marketing.
I think you don't have to. It's not an all or nothing.
No, sure.
And I think if you have the land for scale, then going Hass light makes sense. But also, if you want to experiment with direct sales and or that 2%, let's say 2 to 5% of the consumers who are willing to pay more for variety for selection, I think there's opportunity there. It's going to take time to develop and stuff, or we need somebody to develop it, whether it's a grower group or an innovative packer that will go after that those high-end stores that will be room for both. Definitely, we need to be able to scale, which is what the gem gives us, which is the Maluma crop, I'm thinking, and the lamb does, except that the lamb is has baggage because of how the marketers have treated it.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say kind of exactly that. And I think the question that we still have on gem is what happens when we double, triple, quadruple what we're currently producing. How does that affect the market? And will we still be able to get those Hass prices or Hass-like prices going ahead to the future? I think that's the concern that because of what happened to Lamb House. And I think that's part of the talking about grower sentiment and holding back on switching varieties is we saw what happened with Lamb House and everybody getting 70% on the dollar.
Yeah.
And that's not what growers want.
I think that we're going to run into that problem when you can solve the issue of the valley growing avocados. The valley's not going to grow avocados. So you really think about it, we're 10% of the 3%. Everybody will be saying, wow, we're selling a lot of gems. So 2% of the industry, let's say in a couple of years, is still a very small number, and you can always find a place to sell 2% of the industry, especially if you're looking at the higher end of the marketplace. And so that's a problem for Brokaw when they're selling 100% gems versus Haas, which, you know, there's so to me, I don't think it's an issue because there will always be a home for California product. The key is what's the consumer paying for it versus what's our share of that dollar that they pay, and that's what we need to continue to press on the market, so that we get our share of the dollar, because California fruit will always be sold for the foreseeable future. And how much a premium can we eventually get?
So Nathan.
Okay, so, and I know Eric is here, and Mary Lou talked about the BL 516. I understand it's a good pollinizer for now. I'm wondering, how many of you guys here use a pollinizer? And how likely are you to try this BL 516 as a pollinizer?
So the question is, how many people use pollinizers and how many people would use Marvel as a pollinizer? Is that correct?
Yes.
We need the Marvel.
We need to plant Marvel.
Yeah.
So you use pollinizers?
You know, we do, but I've switched to using them as windbreaks. The gem flowers so much, and if you have abundant bees, then the set on the gem I don't think is as big an issue. But they make great windbreaks.
I've always used pollinizers. I don't know that I'm going to put them into new plantings for gems.
The Marvel or BL 516.
I'm going to, if I do put pollinizers in, it's going to be the cheapest tree. I've got about 6-7% interplanted pollinizers through the years, 2 or 3 in a hole. Used to pick the green skins when it was worth picking them. In the years since, I've been dying to top work the Marvel into the orchard for a while. It hasn't quite gotten there yet. We've been begging them for years. Currently, I've top worked all of our pollinizer sates. At least one of those trees is a surprise. I believe that to be the best pollinizer variety for marketability. It's a nice quality fruit. It never gained much traction, but it's a very nice fruit. I think currently outside of the Marvel that's coming, we have Charwill, which is a green skin, or the Surprise. But I think when we're looking at Hass-like fruit, the Surprise has those attributes. It's a ripens dark, pebbly skin fruit, maybe about the size, a little bit bigger than Hass, more like a lamb Hass, but excellent fruit. And I top worked those because I wanted to be able to start picking that ½ acre of pollinizers. So, for what it's worth, that's my 2 cents there.
Yeah, we have 10% of the pollinizers. In the lower areas, we use 20%. Now we're using Sotano and Adrenal. Adrenal is just later, so that don't work different types of different later bloom.
One additional comment regarding the pollinators, the Sutanos and bacon in particular, because we have a good number of those trees. I went to some smaller packers, local packers, and they found a market for them in Dollar General and some stores in ethnic communities that prefer the green skins. And so you just have to get out there and get the smaller packers interested in a small window of getting the fruit out. Frankly, I was getting 50-60 cents a pound. So
a lot more legwork.
You just got to get out there and get somebody interested in it, and if they find a place for it, like Dollar General, you can actually get something for the fruit.
I think that's maybe what the BL 516 and maybe Surprise why it's interesting is because it looks like CAS and it's pollinator for it, so you can just harvest it in the same bin.
Yeah.
But you have to also look at seasonality because if they don't ripen the same time as it has, then you might start mixing things in.
Can you get some watery fruits in there?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all. It's been an experience today. I'm sorry, but Susan's gonna make it all better for us, right? Yeah, she's gonna clean up all our mistakes. Yeah.
It was a long one today.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.